The black Mercedes glided through the morning sunlight as Victoria Sterling adjusted her diamond earrings in the back seat, completely unaware that the quiet man behind the wheel owned every inch of the leather she sat on, every thread of the company that bore her family name, and every brick of the mansion she called home. Marcus Williams kept his eyes on the road ahead, his weathered hands steady on the steering wheel, while the woman who believed herself his employer launched into another tirade about his driving speed. "For heaven's sake, Marcus, my grandmother could drive faster than this," Victoria snapped, not bothering to look up from her phone. "I have a board meeting in 20 minutes, and if I'm late because of your incompetence, you'll be looking for a new job by lunch." The irony hung in the air like morning mist, invisible to everyone except the man she was addressing. Marcus Williams, 62 years old, had been driving for the Sterling family for exactly 18 months. What Victoria Sterling didn't know was that those 18 months represented the most elaborate game of chess ever played in the corporate world, and she had just moved her queen directly into checkmate position. Marcus had grown up in the same neighborhood where he now picked up Victoria every morning, back when it was lined with modest homes and corner stores instead of boutique cafes and luxury condos. His mother had cleaned houses for wealthy families, coming home each evening with stories about how the other half lived, always reminding him that dignity wasn't something you earned through a paycheck. She taught him that real power came from understanding people, from watching and listening when they thought you were invisible. If you're finding yourself drawn into Marcus's incredible journey, you're exactly where you need to be. Stories like this remind us why we created Acts of Depth, to uncover the human experiences that challenge everything we think we know about power, dignity, and justice. Hit that like button if you're ready to see how this unfolds. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Acts of Depth because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Victoria's phone buzzed with notifications as the Mercedes turned onto Fifth Avenue, the morning sun casting long shadows between the towering buildings. She scrolled through emails with the casual indifference of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. Born into the Sterling fortune, she had inherited not just wealth but the assumption that wealth made her inherently superior to those who served her. "The air conditioning is too cold," she announced, though Marcus had already noticed her slight shiver and was reaching for the climate controls. "Do you have any idea how much this suit cost? I can't afford to look anything less than perfect at today's meeting." Marcus adjusted the temperature without comment, his reflection briefly visible in the rearview mirror. His face carried the kind of quiet strength that comes from surviving storms others couldn't imagine, lines etched by years of building something from nothing while the world assumed he was nothing himself. He had learned early that true power often wore work clothes and drove other people's cars. The Sterling Industries building rose ahead of them like a monument to old money and older assumptions. Victoria had grown up visiting this building, walking its marble halls as if she owned them, which technically she did. Her great-grandfather had founded Sterling Industries in 1923, and the family had maintained control through 3 generations of careful marriages and conservative investments. The company's portfolio included real estate, technology ventures, and a chain of luxury hotels that catered to people exactly like Victoria herself. What she didn't know was that 18 months ago, through a web of shell companies and international investments, ownership of Sterling Industries had quietly transferred to a man named Marcus Williams. The same Marcus Williams who now pulled up to the building's entrance and stepped out to open her door. "Try not to scratch the car when you park it," Victoria said, stepping onto the sidewalk without acknowledging his assistance. "And make sure you're here at exactly 5:30. I have dinner plans, and punctuality is apparently something I need to spell out for you." Marcus watched her disappear through the building's revolving doors, her heels clicking against marble that belonged to him. In a few hours, she would learn the truth about her company, her wealth, and her position in a world she thought she understood. But first, she had a board meeting to attend, one where she would discover that the quarterly reports showed something impossible. Sterling Industries was no longer hers to command. The morning sun climbed higher as Marcus drove the Mercedes to the company parking garage, each turn of the wheel bringing him closer to a moment 18 months in the making. Today would be the day Victoria Sterling learned that the man she treated like furniture had been playing a game she never knew existed, and the rules were about to change forever. Marcus parked the Mercedes in the executive garage and walked to the employee entrance, his security badge beeping softly as he passed through doors that led to a world Victoria Sterling had never seen. The service corridors of Sterling Industries buzzed with the real work of keeping a corporate empire running. Maintenance crews, cleaning staff, security guards, and drivers like himself, all invisible to the executives who depended on their labor. The break room smelled of coffee and disinfectant, its fluorescent lights casting everything in the harsh glow of institutional efficiency. Marcus poured himself a cup from the perpetually brewing pot and sat down at a worn plastic table, pulling out a photograph that he kept folded in his wallet. The image was faded now, creased from years of handling, but it still showed a young woman in a nurse's uniform standing outside a hospital, her smile radiant despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Sarah Williams had been 26 when the photo was taken, just 2 years before she died in a car accident that should never have happened. She had been driving home from a double shift at Sterling Memorial Hospital, the medical facility that Victoria's grandfather had built and named after the family. The intersection where Sarah died had been notorious for accidents, lacking a traffic light that the city council had promised to install for 3 years running. The Sterling family's influence could have fast-tracked that installation, but the paperwork remained buried in bureaucratic delays. Marcus remembered standing in the hospital waiting room, watching his wife's colleagues cry for a woman who had saved dozens of lives but couldn't save her own. He remembered the Sterling family sending flowers to the funeral, an elegant arrangement that arrived with a card expressing condolences from people who had never known Sarah existed. That was when Marcus first understood the distance between those who make decisions and those who live with the consequences. After Sarah's death, Marcus had thrown himself into the small tech company they had started together in their garage. She had been the dreamer, full of ideas about how technology could make healthcare more accessible to underserved communities. He had been the pragmatist, handling the business side while she focused on innovation. Without her vision driving him forward, the company felt like a monument to loss rather than a living enterprise. But grief has a way of crystallizing purpose, and Marcus discovered something unexpected in his sorrow, a talent for seeing patterns that others missed. He began studying the companies that had contracts with Sterling Memorial, the vendors who supplied equipment, the real estate deals that shaped the neighborhood around the hospital. Every connection led to another, and every thread pulled revealed more of the web that connected wealth to power to indifference. 2 years after Sarah's funeral, Marcus sold their tech company for enough money to disappear or start over. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone who knew him. He used the money to begin buying small stakes in dozens of seemingly unrelated businesses. A shipping company here, a software developer there, pieces of a puzzle that would take him 15 years to complete. Victoria Sterling was 12 years old when Marcus buried his wife, though their paths would not cross for another decade and a half. She was attending boarding school in Switzerland, learning French and horseback riding while Marcus was learning how corporate ownership worked, how shell companies could hide true ownership, how patient investors could slowly acquire controlling interests in companies whose leadership had grown complacent. The break room door opened and Rita Gonzalez walked in, her cleaning cart squeaking slightly as she maneuvered it through the narrow space. Rita had been working at Sterling Industries for almost as long as Marcus had been planning his acquisition, and she had become his eyes and ears in the executive floors where drivers rarely ventured. "She's in a mood today," Rita said, pouring herself coffee without needing to specify who she meant. Snapped at 3 assistants before 9 o'clock and made that new intern cry in the elevator. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. Victoria's cruelty wasn't reserved for him alone. It was a pattern of behavior that extended to anyone she perceived as beneath her social station. Rita had witnessed enough of Victoria's outbursts to fill a human resources manual, though complaints against Sterling family members had a way of disappearing into administrative limbo. "The board meeting's at 10, Marcus said quietly. "Today's the day everything changes." Rita studied his face, seeing something there that made her set down her coffee cup. She had known Marcus long enough to recognize the difference between his usual quiet confidence and this moment of reckoning that seemed to surround him like an electric field before a storm. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back." Marcus looked again at the photograph of Sarah, remembering her voice as she talked about the patients who couldn't afford proper care, the families who went bankrupt paying medical bills, the systemic inequalities that kept healthcare out of reach for the people who needed it most. She had believed that technology and compassion could change the world, one innovation at a time. She's had 18 months to prove she deserves the power she inherited, Marcus said, folding the photograph and putting it back in his wallet. 18 months to show kindness to the people who make her life possible. Instead, she's shown me exactly who she chooses to be when she thinks no one important is watching. The clock on the break room wall showed 9:45, and somewhere 30 floors above them, Victoria Sterling was settling into the conference room where she expected to review quarterly reports and make decisions about other people's livelihoods. She had no idea that the numbers on those reports would tell a story she had never imagined, or that the man she had berated for driving too slowly was about to teach her the difference between inherited wealth and earned power. Marcus stood up and straightened his uniform, checking his appearance in the break room mirror one last time. In 15 minutes, Victoria Sterling would discover that her entire world had been built on assumptions that were no longer true, and the quiet driver she treated like furniture held every key to the kingdom she thought was hers by birthright. Victoria Sterling swept into the Sterling Industries boardroom at exactly 10 o'clock, her heels announcing her arrival against the polished hardwood floors that had witnessed 3 generations of family power. The conference table stretched before her like an altar to corporate tradition, surrounded by leather chairs that had been occupied by men in expensive suits making decisions about other people's money for nearly a century. Today felt like any other quarterly review, another routine exercise in maintaining the empire her great-grandfather had built with steel and ambition. The board members were already seated, their faces wearing expressions that Victoria initially interpreted as the usual mixture of deference and careful attention that came with her presence. James Morrison, the longtime CFO who had served her father before her, shuffled through papers with unusual nervousness. Patricia Chen, the head of legal affairs, kept glancing at her phone as if expecting crucial information that hadn't yet arrived. The atmosphere felt charged with something Victoria couldn't identify, like the moments before a thunderstorm when the air itself seems to hold its breath. "Good morning, everyone," Victoria said, taking her seat at the head of the table with the casual confidence of someone who had never questioned her right to occupy that space. "I trust we have good news about the quarterly numbers. The hotel division should be showing strong performance, and I want to discuss expanding our real estate acquisitions in the downtown district." James Morrison cleared his throat, the sound echoing strangely in the suddenly quiet room. He opened a thick folder and spread documents across the table with the careful precision of someone handling evidence in a trial. The numbers on the papers looked familiar at first glance, but as Victoria's eyes focused on the details, something cold began to settle in her stomach. "Victoria, we have a situation that requires immediate attention," Morrison said, his voice carrying none of its usual warmth. "According to our latest ownership audit, Sterling Industries has experienced a complete transfer of controlling interest. As of this morning, 68% of company stock is held by MW Holdings, a private investment firm that has been quietly acquiring shares through various subsidiaries over the past 18 months. Victoria stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. The words made sense individually, but strung together they created a reality that seemed impossible. Sterling Industries had been family-owned since its founding, protected by careful trust structures and ironclad legal arrangements that her grandfather's lawyers had designed specifically to prevent outside acquisition. "That's impossible," she said, her voice carrying the sharp edge that usually made subordinates scramble to fix whatever had displeased her. "Our ownership structure is bulletproof. No outside entity could acquire controlling interest without triggering our anti-takeover provisions. Someone has made a catastrophic error in the paperwork." Patricia Chun leaned forward, sliding a second set of documents across the table. The legal papers bore official seals and signatures that Victoria recognized as authentic, each page documenting a transaction that should have been impossible under the family's carefully constructed corporate defenses. The acquisitions were structured through 47 different shell companies, Chen explained, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was reporting. Each purchase was small enough to avoid triggering disclosure requirements. The buyer used a combination of international holding companies, pension fund investments, and private equity vehicles to mask the true scope of the acquisition. It's one of the most sophisticated corporate takeovers I've ever seen, executed with surgical precision over an extended timeline. Victoria felt the boardroom begin to tilt around her, as if the building itself had shifted on its foundation. Everything she had taken for granted about her position, her power, her very identity was contained in those papers that proved someone else now controlled the company that bore her family name. The quarterly meeting she had expected to be routine had become the moment when her entire world revealed itself to be an illusion. "Who is MW Holdings?" she demanded, her voice rising despite her attempts to maintain composure. "What kind of investment firm has the resources to execute this kind of takeover without anyone noticing? I want every detail about these people. And I want our lawyers to find a way to reverse these transactions immediately." Morrison exchanged glances with Chun before answering, and Victoria caught something in that look that made her blood pressure spike. They knew something she didn't, something that would make this situation even worse than it already appeared. "MW Holdings is wholly owned by a private individual," Morrison said carefully. "The paperwork lists the beneficial owner as Marcus Williams, though we haven't been able to determine much about his background or financing sources. The transactions appear to be entirely legitimate, funded through a combination of tech company sales and investment returns spanning over 15 years. The name hit Victoria like a physical blow, though it took her several seconds to process why it sounded familiar. Marcus Williams. Her driver, Marcus Williams. The quiet man who opened her car doors and endured her complaints about his driving, had somehow managed to buy her company out from under her while she treated him like hired help. "Marcus Williams," she repeated, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "My driver Marcus Williams owns my company?" The silence that followed her question stretched until it became unbearable. Every person in that boardroom understood that they were witnessing the collapse of an assumption that had seemed as solid as gravity itself. The natural order of things, where Sterling family members commanded and service workers obeyed, had been revealed as nothing more than a shared delusion that one man had patiently dismantled over 18 months of careful planning. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced at the screen to see a message from Marcus himself. "The car is ready whenever you're finished with your meeting, Miss Sterling. We have much to discuss." The casual tone of the message, so familiar from hundreds of previous communications, now carried implications that made Victoria's hands shake as she set the phone down. The man who had been driving her to work every morning had been playing a game she never knew existed, and she was just beginning to understand that she had already lost. Outside the boardroom windows, the city continued its daily rhythm, unaware that one of its oldest business dynasties had just discovered it was no longer in control of its own destiny. Somewhere in the building below, Marcus Williams was waiting patiently for the moment when Victoria Sterling would have to face the man she had treated as invisible and acknowledge that he held her entire future in his weathered hands. Victoria Sterling sat in the executive boardroom for 20 minutes after the last board member had filed out, staring at documents that redefined her entire existence. The quarterly reports that should have confirmed her authority had instead revealed that authority to be an elaborate fiction, carefully maintained by a man who had been watching her every move while she treated him as scenery. The leather chair that had held 3 generations of Sterling family leadership now felt like a throne made of sand, dissolving beneath her with each passing moment. Her phone rang with the sharp tone she had assigned to emergency calls, and she saw her personal attorney's name on the screen. David Rothschild had handled Sterling family legal matters for 2 decades, and his voice carried the kind of panic that expensive lawyers rarely allowed themselves to display. "Victoria, I need you to listen carefully," Rothschild said without preamble. "I've been reviewing the corporate documents your legal team sent over, and this acquisition is absolutely airtight. Whoever structured this takeover understood corporate law better than anyone in my firm. Every transaction was legal, properly documented, and executed in a way that bypassed every protection your grandfather put in place." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed world closing in around her. There has to be something, some technicality, some irregularity in the filings. This company has been in my family for a century. David. It can't just disappear because some driver figured out how to play the stock market. "This wasn't stock market speculation," Rothschild replied, his voice heavy with professional admiration for an opponent he couldn't defeat. This was a chess game played over 15 years by someone who understood every move before he made it. The shell companies were established in different jurisdictions. The financing came from legitimate sources, and every acquisition was timed to avoid triggering disclosure requirements. I've never seen anything like it. Victoria hung up and walked to the boardroom windows, looking down at the street where Marcus would be waiting with her car. From 40 floors up, the people below looked like ants moving with purposeful direction toward destinations she couldn't fathom. Somewhere among them was the man who had dismantled her inheritance while she complained about air conditioning and driving speeds. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt like descending into a different world, one where the rules she had lived by no longer applied. Victoria's reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman who looked exactly the same as she had that morning, but she could feel something fundamental shifting inside her chest, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves beneath the surface of her consciousness. Marcus was standing beside the Mercedes, checking his watch with the same unhurried attention to detail that had characterized his behavior for 18 months. He looked up as she approached, and Victoria saw something in his eyes that she had never noticed before. The quiet confidence of a man who had never doubted the outcome of a game others didn't know they were playing. "Miss Sterling," he said, opening the rear door with the same courtesy he had shown every morning. "I trust your meeting was informative." Victoria stopped walking, her hand tightening around her purse strap as she stared at this man who had somehow transformed from furniture into the most powerful person in her life. "You know exactly how that meeting went, Marcus. The question is what you want from me now that you've destroyed everything I thought I knew about my own life." Marcus studied her face for a moment, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. "I think we should take a drive, Miss Sterling. There are things you need to understand about why this happened, and that conversation is better had somewhere private." Against every instinct that told her to run, to call security, to find some way to reassert control over a situation that had spiraled beyond her comprehension, Victoria got into the car. The leather seats that had always felt like a cocoon of privilege now felt like a trap, and she realized that for the first time in her adult life, she was completely at someone else's mercy. Marcus pulled out of the parking garage and into traffic with the same steady competence that had once annoyed her but now felt ominous. He drove through downtown streets that Victoria had traveled thousands of times, but today they looked different, as if she were seeing them through someone else's eyes. The homeless people she usually ignored, the construction workers she never acknowledged, the service employees who cleaned buildings and served food all seemed suddenly visible, as if Marcus's revelation had adjusted her vision to include people she had never bothered to notice. 15 years ago, I buried my wife," Marcus said quietly, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "Sarah Williams died because a traffic light that should have been installed years earlier was delayed by bureaucratic indifference. She was coming home from Sterling Memorial Hospital, where she worked as a nurse in the emergency department, trying to save people who couldn't afford to be saved anywhere else." Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach as she began to understand that this story was connected to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Sterling Memorial Hospital was one of the crown jewels of the family's philanthropic legacy, a state-of-the-art medical facility that bore their name in bronze letters above the main entrance. "After Sarah died, I spent 2 years studying everything about the Sterling family and Sterling Industries," Marcus continued, turning onto a tree-lined street that Victoria recognized as leading toward the old neighborhood where the hospital was located. "I learned about the board meetings where cost-cutting measures were discussed, the budget decisions that prioritized profit margins over patient care, the corporate culture that treated healthcare as a business rather than a human right." The car slowed as they approached Sterling Memorial Hospital, its modern facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Victoria had attended groundbreaking ceremonies and fundraising galas here, posing for photographs with politicians and donors who praised the Sterling family's commitment to community health. She had never spent time in the emergency department where Marcus's wife had worked, never seen the understaffed wards where nurses like Sarah Williams fought to save lives with inadequate resources. Marcus parked across the street from the hospital entrance, and Victoria found herself staring at a building that suddenly looked different than it had in every previous visit. The bronze letters spelling out Sterling Memorial seemed to mock her now, representing not family legacy but a system that had failed the woman sitting beside her and countless others like her. "This isn't about money, Miss Sterling," Marcus said, turning to face her directly for the first time since she had gotten in the car. "This is about accountability. You've had 18 months to show me who you choose to be when you think no one important is watching. 18 months to demonstrate that the power you inherited comes with responsibility for the people whose lives you affect." Victoria met his gaze and saw something there that made her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't the expression of a man seeking revenge or financial gain. This was the look of someone who had spent nearly 2 decades planning a reckoning, and she was about to discover exactly what that reckoning would demand of her. Marcus Williams sat in the driver's seat of the Mercedes, looking across the street at Sterling Memorial Hospital while Victoria Sterling grappled with the weight of everything she had just learned. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings, and Victoria could see people moving in and out of the hospital entrance. Nurses finishing their shifts, families visiting loved ones, patients taking tentative steps during recovery walks. For the first time in her life, she saw them not as background scenery, but as individual human beings whose lives had been touched by decisions made in boardrooms she controlled. "What happens now?" Victoria asked, her voice smaller than it had ever been. "You own my company. You've exposed everything I thought I knew about my own life as a lie. What's your endgame here, Marcus?" Marcus pulled a manila folder from the glove compartment and handed it to her. Inside were architectural plans, medical equipment proposals, and budget projections that outlined a complete transformation of Sterling Memorial Hospital. The documents showed expansions to the emergency department, new equipment for underserved wards, and a comprehensive program to provide free health care to uninsured patients in the surrounding community. Sarah spent the last year of her life writing grant proposals for programs that could make healthcare accessible to everyone, not just people who could afford premium insurance, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of memory and purpose. She had ideas about mobile clinics, community health programs, and medical technology that could reach people in their own neighborhoods. The Sterling family had the resources to fund every single one of her proposals, but those applications disappeared into administrative committees that never gave them serious consideration. Victoria studied the plans, recognizing her own signature on rejection letters that had dismissed Sarah Williams's proposals as not aligned with current strategic priorities. The cold corporate language that she had used routinely now seemed cruel in a way that made her stomach clench with something she had rarely experienced: genuine shame. "I could have destroyed Sterling Industries completely," Marcus continued, his tone matter-of-fact rather than threatening. "I could have sold off the assets, dissolved the company, and left your family with nothing but the realization that their empire had crumbled while they weren't paying attention. But that wouldn't have honored Sarah's memory or helped the people she wanted to serve." Marcus pointed toward the hospital entrance, where a young nurse was helping an elderly man navigate the steps with his walker. "Instead, I'm offering you a choice, Miss Sterling. You can fight this takeover in court, spending years and millions of dollars on legal battles that you'll ultimately lose, or you can help me transform Sterling Industries into the kind of company Sarah envisioned. A company that uses its wealth and influence to solve problems instead of ignoring them." Victoria felt something shifting inside her chest, like ice beginning to crack under the pressure of running water. The casual cruelty with which she had treated Marcus, Rita, and countless other service workers suddenly seemed not just wrong but profoundly stupid. She had been surrounded by people whose perspectives could have taught her things about leadership and responsibility that no business school could provide, but she had chosen to see them as invisible. "Why give me this choice at all?" Victoria asked. "You could implement these changes without me. You own the company now." Marcus smiled for the first time since she had known him, and the expression transformed his entire face. "Because real change requires more than just new ownership. It requires people who understand that power is a responsibility, not a privilege. You've spent your entire life in a position where you could have made a difference, and instead you chose to make yourself comfortable. But people can change, Ms. Sterling. The question is whether you want to." Victoria looked again at the hospital, remembering the fundraising galas where she had posed for photographs and made speeches about the Sterling family's commitment to community health. Those events had felt like performances, opportunities to burnish the family reputation while maintaining comfortable distance from the actual work of healing. Now she understood that Sarah Williams had been in those same halls, fighting battles that the Sterling family could have won with a single board resolution. "I treated you terribly," Victoria said, the words feeling strange and necessary in her mouth. "For 18 months, I was cruel to you almost every single day, and you never responded with anything but professional courtesy. I need to understand why." Marcus considered her question carefully before answering. "Because Sarah taught me that dignity isn't something you can take from another person. It's something you either choose to maintain or choose to surrender. Every morning when you criticized my driving or complained about the air conditioning, I remembered that I was there by choice, working towards something bigger than daily indignities. But you were also making choices in those moments, choices about who you wanted to be when you thought no one important was watching." The weight of those 18 months settled on Victoria like a lead blanket, each memory of casual cruelty now revealed as a test she had failed repeatedly. But Marcus was offering her something unprecedented in her privileged life, a genuine opportunity for redemption that would require real work and fundamental change. "If I agree to work with you on this transformation," Victoria said slowly, "what would that actually look like? I've never run a company with the goal of helping people instead of maximizing profits." Marcus handed her a business card with a simple logo and contact information. "There's someone I'd like you to meet. Dr. Elena Rodriguez runs a community health clinic about 10 minutes from here. She's been applying for Sterling Industries grants for 3 years, trying to fund a mobile medical unit that could bring healthcare directly to underserved neighborhoods. Tomorrow morning, instead of going to another board meeting, we're going to visit her clinic and you're going to see what Sarah's vision actually looks like in practice." Victoria stared at the business card, understanding that accepting it meant accepting a complete redefinition of her identity and purpose. The woman who had walked into the Sterling Industries boardroom that morning expecting routine quarterly reports no longer existed. In her place sat someone who had to choose between fighting a battle she couldn't win or embracing a transformation that terrified her. "And if I refuse?" Victoria asked. "Then you'll spend the next several years watching Sterling Industries become everything it should have been while you fight legal battles from the sidelines," Marcus replied. "Either way, the changes are happening. The only question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the history that needs to be overcome." Victoria looked one more time at Sterling Memorial Hospital, seeing it now through Marcus Williams's eyes and understanding that every person walking through those doors represented a choice between indifference and compassion. She thought about Sarah Williams, the nurse whose death had set this entire chain of events in motion, and realized that some reckonings are 15 years in the making but arrive exactly when they're needed most. "Drive me to that clinic," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was choosing. "I think it's time I learned what it means to earn the power I've been given." Marcus started the Mercedes and pulled back into traffic, and Victoria Sterling began the first real day of her education in what leadership actually meant. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating a future that would require her to see every person she encountered as fully human, deserving of dignity and respect regardless of their position in the hierarchies she had taken for granted. Stories like this remind us that transformation is always possible, but it requires the courage to see ourselves clearly and the humility to admit when we've been wrong. Real power isn't about commanding others from a position of privilege. It's about using whatever influence we have to lift up the people around us. If Marcus and Victoria's journey has moved you, if it's made you think about how you treat the people who serve you every day, then it's accomplished something important. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and remember that every interaction we have is an opportunity to choose dignity over cruelty, understanding over indifference. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simple recognition that every person we encounter has a story, a struggle, and a value that transcends their job title or social position. The question isn't whether we have power over others, but what we choose to do with whatever power we've been given.